All right, so picture this. You're living in a time where your love for pigeon racing could actually lead to a city's downfall. Like we're talking biblical levels of sin here.
Wow,
Yeah, it sounds crazy, right?
it does.
But that's the world we're stepping into today. The golden age of Baghdad, a city that didn't just shape the Islamic world, but sent ripples through Western thought that we still feel today.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Baghdad, during the Abbasid Caliphate, wasn't just a center of power. It was a hub, a melting pot, drawing in scholars and knowledge from all corners of the vast Islamic empire and even beyond.
It's almost like ancient Greece where everything led to Athens. But in this case, all roads led to Baghdad. And we're talking about a time when Europe was still finding its footing while Baghdad was flourishing.
That's a really good comparison. And the city's founder, Al-Mansur, he envisioned Baghdad as a universal city, a place where knowledge from every civilization would come together,
Right.
including ancient Persia. This vision is what led to the House of Wisdom.
The House of Wisdom.
Not just a library, but a testament to Baghdad's dedication to scholarship and learning.
More like a massive think tank,
Yeah.
right? Bringing in the best minds of the time to translate debate and build upon the knowledge that was already out there. And this is where things get really interesting because it played a huge role in shaping Islamic law and jurisprudence during this period.
Absolutely. This is when we see the rise of the ulama, Islamic scholars, and their influence on interpreting and defining Sharia. We hear about Sharia all the time, but this era in Baghdad was pivotal in its development.
And I'm sure our listeners are somewhat familiar with Sharia, but could you break it down a little further for us? How did it take shape in Baghdad and what were some of the debates surrounding it?
Sure. So Sharia, meaning the path, is basically the Islamic legal system derived from the Quran and the Sunnah. What's interesting is that in Baghdad during this time, you see different schools of thought popping up, each with their own take on Sharia. Like you have the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, and Hanbali schools. These schools, with their diverse viewpoints, have had a lasting impact on Islamic legal practices throughout the Muslim world.
And this brings us back to our pigeon-loving Caliph al-Mahdi. He was a big fan of pigeon racing, but some scholars argued it was a sin. Can you explain this a bit more?
Well, the belief was that pigeon racing started in Sodom.
Sodom is in.
Yeah, and Sodom didn't have the best reputation, so they saw it as carrying on those sinful practices.
So pigeon racing was seen as comparable to, well, you get the idea. This wasn't just an academic debate. This had real consequences for al-Mahdi, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Al-Mahdi actually ended up destroying his entire flock of pigeons because of this interpretation. It really shows how much influence the ulama had back then. They could even challenge the caliph based on their understanding of Islamic law.
Wow, it's incredible to think about those power dynamics. But it wasn't all just pigeons and sin. The debates covered a wide array of topics, from finances to free will. These scholars were tackling some pretty heavy philosophical questions while figuring out the rules for everyday life.
You're right. And we still feel the impact of those debates today. The different schools of Islamic legal thought that came out of Baghdad continue to shape legal practices in the Muslim world.
So what happened in Baghdad all those centuries ago is still relevant to how Islamic law is understood and applied today. That's pretty amazing.
It really speaks to the lasting influence of this period. And it wasn't just the Islamic world that Baghdad had an impact on. Its influence reached the West, too. Think about the translation movement, where Greek texts were translated into Arabic.
Oh yeah, the House of Wisdom became a major center for translating these texts, covering everything from philosophy and medicine to astrology and mathematics. This must have been a huge undertaking, definitely fueled by the patronage of caliphs like al-Mahdi. What drove them to support these translations?
There were a few reasons. Some wanted to engage with different schools of thought. Others felt a sense of intellectual rivalry with the Byzantine Empire. But what's really fascinating is that these translations eventually made their way to Europe through Spain and had a major hand in the intellectual awakening of the West during the Renaissance.
So Baghdad, right in the heart of the Islamic world, became this bridge between ancient Greek knowledge and the European Renaissance. It's mind-blowing. But of course, we can't talk about Baghdad without mentioning the Arabian Nights.
Oh, of course not.
Those captivating stories.
They offer a window into life in Baghdad, even if we have to separate fact from fiction.
And that's what makes these stories so intriguing to me. It's not just about emperors and grand events. It's about everyday people, their struggles, their triumphs, their clever schemes. It makes history feel more relatable, more human.
I agree. Let's dive into that world next. It's like the Arabian Nights with Scheherazade and her never-ending stories is a portal right into the heart of Baghdad. We catch glimpses of the city's social fabric, the underbelly, even The lives of those who don't usually make it into the history books.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about these stories for me. It's not all emperors and big events. You get to see the everyday lives of people, their struggles, their wins, their clever little schemes. It makes history feel more real, more
Hmm.
relatable.
Exactly. For example, in the Arabian Nights, we see the lives of blacksmiths, butchers, night watchmen, people who are often overlooked by the elite.
Oh, yeah.
It gives them a voice, a presence in the story of the city.
That's right. And we can't forget about the women.
Oh, absolutely not.
We have Scheherazade, the ultimate heroine,
Wow.
outsmarting a tyrannical king with her wit and storytelling. And she's not the only strong female character, right?
Absolutely not. The Arabian Nights shows women as smart and resourceful, even in a patriarchal society. Like there's crafty Delilah, the master con artist,
Right.
and Morgiana from Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, the one who outsmarts the thieves and saves her master with her quick thinking.
Morgiana is iconic, pouring boiling oil on those thieves hiding in the jars. Talk about girl power.
I think-
It seems like the Arabian Nights for its time actually gave women agency and complexity. They're more than just passive figures.
I see what you mean. While we have to acknowledge the historical context, the Arabian Nights does show us glimpses of female characters shaping their own destinies. They're often the ones solving problems and saving the day.
It's like these stories, in a subtle way, were pushing back against those traditional gender roles, showing us a world where women could be just as powerful and influential as men.
That's an interesting perspective, and maybe that's part of why the Arabian Nights has remained so popular. These stories blend escapism with social commentary. You get to enjoy the fantasy while reflecting on societal norms at the same time.
It's amazing how these stories can be rooted in history but still resonate with us today. They make us think about the power of stories to challenge our assumptions and offer new perspectives.
Exactly. And speaking of new perspectives, we've talked about the historical figures in the Arabian Nights like Harun al-Rashid, but we can't forget about all the fantastical creatures that populate these tales.
Oh, yeah.
Genies, flying carpets, talking animals. It's a world overflowing with magic.
It really is.
Yeah.
Like stepping into another dimension. The genies, for example, they're not just a Disney thing. They have a deep history in Islamic mythology. Can you tell us a bit more about them?
So genies, or jinn in Arabic, are these supernatural beings mentioned in the Quran and pre-Islamic Arabian folklore. They're believed to be made of smokeless fire and have the ability to shape-shift and influence the human world.
So they're not just wish granters. They're complex beings with their own motives.
Yeah.
Were they always seen as good in the Arabian Nights?
Not always. Some were benevolent, granting wishes and helping humans, but others were tricksters, a mix of helpful and harmful.
So kind of like us humans then, with all our complexities and contradictions. And then we have the flying carpets, the ultimate escape from the ordinary, soaring through the skies. What's the story behind those?
Flying carpets have deep roots in Middle Eastern folklore, often tied to tales of adventure. No one knows for sure where they came from, but they likely stem from ancient stories about enchanted objects and the desire to escape the limits of the physical world.
Like a metaphor for the power of imagination. I love how the Arabian Nights uses these fantastical elements to take us to these exotic places. From bustling marketplaces to secret palaces, it creates a world that's both familiar and totally enchanting.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that even these fantastical elements often reflect real-world experiences. For example, the stories about Sinbad the Sailor, with all the mythical creatures and dangerous adventures, might be inspired by the journeys of Arab traders across the Indian Ocean. They encounter different cultures and face the wonders and perils of the sea.
Like those old maps with "Here be dragons" marking uncharted territories. The Arabian Nights captures that sense of wonder, that blend of reality and fantasy, in a way that still captivates audiences today.
Right. But the Arabian Nights isn't just about escapism and fantasy. It's also a reflection of the society that produced it. We get these glimpses into the political intrigue, the social hierarchies, the religious beliefs, even the everyday worries of the people who lived in Baghdad during its golden age.
It's like a historical tapestry woven with threads of fantasy, adventure, and social commentary. And what's remarkable is that the tapestry keeps evolving, with each generation adding their own interpretations and adaptations.
It speaks to the power of stories to transcend time and culture. The Arabian Nights, with its universal themes of love loss, betrayal, redemption, continues to resonate with people all over the world, reminding us of the common human experiences that connect us even across centuries.
It's a reminder that even though the world has changed drastically since Baghdad's golden age, a good story never loses its power. These stories are like time capsules carrying whispers of the past into the present. letting us connect with people who lived centuries ago on a deeply human level.
And what's fascinating is that the Arabian Nights doesn't offer just one fixed perspective on Baghdad. It gives us this kaleidoscope of viewpoints, from the lavish lives of the caliphs to the struggles of everyday people to the schemes of the criminal underworld.
So it's not just a romanticized version of history. It acknowledges the complexities and contradictions of life in Baghdad, the beauty and the grit, the grandeur and the everyday struggles. It's a world where piety and indulgence coexist, where scholars debate philosophy while thieves are planning their next heist.
Exactly. And maybe that's why the Arabian Nights continues to fascinate us. It's a glimpse into a world that's both familiar and completely foreign, alluring and a little bit dangerous.
Like a travel brochure that warns you about pickpockets while tempting you with exotic food and hidden treasures.
Precisely. But the Arabian Nights wasn't just reflecting society, it was actively shaping it as well. These stories traveled far and wide, influencing not just the Islamic world, but Western literature, art, and music too.
It's amazing how tales whispered in Baghdad centuries ago could inspire artists and writers across the world.
It really shows the power of storytelling to cross geographical boundaries and cultural differences. The Arabian Nights, with its themes of love loss, betrayal, redemption, transcends time and space. It shows that despite differences in culture or historical context, we're all connected by shared human experiences.
It reminds us that even though the world has changed so much since Baghdad's golden age, the power of a good story is as strong as ever.
And speaking of shared experiences, there's one thing in the Arabian Nights that I find particularly interesting: the recurring theme of disguise and mistaken identity. We see characters like Harun al-Rashid venturing out incognito, blending in with everyday people, and even the thieves use disguises to pull off their schemes.
That's a great point. Disguise is everywhere in the Arabian Nights. It seems to reflect this fascination with the idea that appearances can be deceiving and that true character is hidden beneath the surface.
You got it. The Arabian Nights makes us question our assumptions and look beyond what we see on the surface. Even the most outlandish stories can reveal profound truths about human nature.
It's like those optical illusions where you see one image, but then a whole new image appears when you shift your perspective. The Arabian Nights does that with history, society, even ourselves.
It really is. And what's fascinating is that the Arabian Nights is rooted in a specific time and place,
Right.
but it keeps evolving and adapting with each generation. Like, think about it. These stories have been translated into so many languages, and they've inspired everything from operas and ballets to movies and even video games.
Yeah, it's like the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Right.
The Arabian Nights still resonates with people because it speaks to those universal human experiences, our desires, fears, triumphs, and of course our little slip-ups along the way.
You're exactly right. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from the Arabian Nights. It reminds us that no matter our differences in culture, language, or historical context, we're all connected by those shared threads of humanity woven into these timeless tales.
So to our listeners, if this deep dive into the Arabian Nights and the Golden Age of Baghdad has piqued your interest, we encourage you to check out these stories for yourselves. Step into the world of Scheherazade, Harun al-Rashid al-Aqab the Eagle, and all the other amazing characters that bring this era to life.
And as you journey through these tales, think about this. What seemingly insignificant details of our own lives today might become legendary in the future? What stories will we leave behind for future generations to uncover and contemplate?
That's a great question to leave our listeners with. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Arabian Nights and the Golden Age of Baghdad. We'll see you next time.